What if Mace Windu killed Darth Sidious in Revenge of the Sith and became Chancellor? Our story begins inside of the Jedi Council chambers as Jedi Master Mace Windu has gathered all of the Council Masters from across the galaxy. All of the seats are quickly filled, except for 3. Kit Fisto, Aegon Kolar, and Saesee Tin were missing, and Windu would soon inform the Council that the 3 Masters are dead. And as the Masters were all taking this in, Windu revealed something else. Darth Sidious is dead. The Dark Lord of the Sith has secretly been Chancellor Palpatine since he was elected, and no one could tell until he told Anakin. The many faces of the counselors turned to Anakin, who was in his seat, still looking rather sick. As Anakin sat in his seat, he was barely hearing what Windu was saying. He went against his inner thoughts and just stayed right here until Windu had returned. Sidious, Palpatine was gone, and Anakin had to find a new way to save Padme. He just nodded to the Masters, and the meeting would progress. Windu acknowledged Anakin's expression, but decided there were more important matters at the moment. Ki-Adi-Mundi spoke up from Mykeeto, saying that he fears Sidious's death may not be enough for the Republic. Palpatine's dictatorship has essentially been legitimized already, and he clearly had a supermajority in the Senate. It's clear that Mas Amedda will be able to step right in and carry out his agenda. Windu's expression turned dark as Yoda responded, saying that the Senate is filled with corruption, and perhaps the senators must be controlled until they can be replaced with honest but now Mace Windu butted back in, asking the council what they've become. Killing the Chancellor is one thing, but taking over the Senate? It's as though Dooku was right about them all along. To save the Republic, it has to be destroyed? Now Obi-Wan spoke up, saying that Dooku was a Sith, but before he left the Jedi, his intentions may have been noble. He saw what the Jedi are only now seeing, and perhaps the Jedi do need to step in or make up for their lack of foresight through the years. And now Plo Koon, all the way from Cato Nemoidia, said they are all ignoring the key factor here. Palpatine being revealed as a Sith, as Dooku's partner in war and master in training, will turn the galaxy against him and his supporters. Windu nodded, telling Plo he's right, but they must assume that Mas Amedda and others close to Palpatine knew this already, and they cannot be allowed to step into power. So it was soon decided that Windu would be leading the council as they take over the Senate. Before long, the Galactic Senate would indeed be gathered, and Vice Chair Mas Amedda's hands gripped the railing of his pod so tightly that his knuckles were turning into a more sickly shade of blue than usual. This was all chaos to him. He just saw Palpatine's dead body in his office, the scorched marks of lightsabers all over the room, and now the Jedi have entered the Senate district barely an hour ago, with hundreds of 501st clone troopers at their heels. Moss had thought briefly that perhaps this was all part of Palpatine's plan, one final move, but he did see the truth now. His denial was gone. Palpatine was killed by these traitors. The crowd around him was tense, and there were whispers that turned into shouted accusations aimed at the Jedi, as everyone tried to gather what was happening here. Finally, a group of Jedi Masters rose up on the central platform. Mace Windu was leading them. Mas Amedda wanted to stand up, scream that this was treason, but he could see the faces of these senators, even the Outer Rim delegates, who'd once hated the Republic's central power, now looked hollow and frightened. They wouldn't follow him, not yet. And across the rotunda, Bail Organa sat rigid in his own pod, hands folded together. He listened as Mace Windu stepped forward, the great lights bathing the Jedi Master in cold blue, and Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and surprisingly, young Anakin Skywalker stood behind Windu, looking around the great Senate chamber. Smart, Bail thought. Anakin Skywalker was beloved. He was the hero of the Republic in this war. If the Jedi were seen beside him, it gave the illusion that perhaps this was more righteous than it seems. Bail glanced sideways to where Padme Amidala's pod was floating, just a few rows away. Her face, like usual, was a mask, calm, serene, but Bail could read the tension in her posture. Bail liked the Jedi. He greatly despised Palpatine, but he knew what the Jedi were about to attempt, and it made him uneasy. Soon, a chime would ring out, the Senate floor would quiet, and Mace Windu would finally speak, a voice full of certainty, as he addressed the people of the Republic, saying that the former Chancellor Palpatine has been revealed as the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Sidious. Windu raised a hand, and a hologram flickered to life beside him. It showed grainy recordings from Palpatine's office, as Palpatine himself fought the Jedi with his red lightsaber, killing 3 of them, and ultimately firing waves of lightning up at Mace Windu before Windu ended his life, seemingly with no other choice. Up in the Senate again, Padme's heart pounded in her chest. She watched Anakin, her husband, her love, standing so still beside Master Kenobi and the others. Anakin's face was unreadable, but she knew him well enough to see the tension in his jaw. The Jedi were seizing power because they had to. or because they wanted to. She couldn't tell which anymore. Windu continued on, his voice even, as he told the people that Palpatine orchestrated both sides of this terrible war. Millions were dead by his hand, and the galaxy nearly collapsed because of his lies. Windu looked around, as if he feared the next words that were coming out of his mouth, and then he told the Senate that the Jedi Order will not allow another manipulator, another dictator, to rise in Palpatine's place. Mace Windu stirred in his pod, furious but powerless. Padme's breath caught as Windu spoke the next words. He told the Senate that, effective immediately and by unanimous decision of the Jedi Council, he will serve as interim Chancellor until all of the senators have been investigated for corruption and working with Palpatine during this dark time of war. Bail didn't know how to feel about this. There was no vote or no discussion. It was just an exchange of power. The pod next to him buzzed. A HoloNet reporter was transmitting this live across the galaxy. The Senate stood still. There weren't many cheers, but there weren't many protests either. They were all just rather stunned by all of this, waiting to see what came next. And high up in the Senate, a figure leaned back in the shadows. They watched as Windu received only silent, reluctant acceptance. Perfect, they thought. The Republic had not been saved today. It had been cracked open. All the Jedi had done was replace one tyrant with another, at least in the eyes of the frightened masses. It didn't matter how many holograms Windu showed. Deep down, the people didn't trust the Jedi. Palpatine worked hard to ensure the image of the Jedi deteriorated during the war. So, Sly Moore sat back in her pod as she promised to bring Palpatine's vision of an empire without Jedi to fruition, all in due time. And so, in the underground halls of the Federal District, Sly Moore would soon gather her most trusted allies that would have been loyal to Palpatine. There was an Arcanian bureaucrat here named Chancellor, a governor from the Mid-Rim called Rey Eneb, 2 Red Guards loyal to Palpatine, Sate Pestage, a former advisor to Palpatine who could make people disappear, and a few others. They huddled as Moore laid her plans out, her voice no louder than a whisper, but cutting very sharply. They would not fight Jedi in the open. They would let the Jedi rot from within, sowing doubt, spreading terror, guiding loyalists and disillusioned citizens alike into the chaos. The Republic and the Jedi would drown in their fear. It was not an army that would win back the galaxy, it will collapse itself. And when Mace Windu stumbled into the room, demanding to know what treachery was being plotted against the new government and why he wasn't involved, Moore did not hesitate. With a flick of her pale, spidery fingers, she seized the former vice chairman by the throat, lifting Amida effortlessly from the ground with a forced choke. The loyalists watched in silence as he struggled, blue face darkening, before Moore let his lifeless body collapse to the floor without ceremony. Moore asked if anyone else had an objection to her leadership, and no one budged. She said this was good, and it's time to begin. She was no Sith, no Jedi, but she wielded the Force. Palpatine knew this, and he kept her by his side. She had a little bit of it, enough to kill, enough to use it if need be. And meanwhile, Chancellor Mace Windu would sit alone in the newly restored Chancellor's office, banners of the Republic freshly hung as Palpatine's artwork and statues were removed. The office was repainted from the dark red back to a vibrant mix of blue and white, and now Mace Windu was already working tirelessly to keep the Republic intact. He was enacting the emergency powers to stabilize systems, creating political councils to monitor new Senate elections for everyone who stayed in office during this war. He was commanding the Judicial Department to interrogate those in Palpatine's inner circle. And yet with every decree he passed, he could feel the weight of suspicion growing around the Jedi. In the Senate corridors, as days passed by, Bail Organa was struggling with all of this. His heart did tell him to trust the Jedi, who had defended democracy with their lives, but his mind recoiled at what the Republic was becoming, a state maintained by unelected power, however noble the intentions. In one heated moment behind closed doors, Bail would accuse Windu and the Jedi of becoming the very thing he had destroyed, of clutching authority with a Jedi's grip instead of the people's will. Windu, his patience soon eroded by months of impossible decisions, answered with the simple truth. The galaxy was not yet ready. Palpatine's influence still loomed. Bail left that meeting colder than he'd entered, wondering if he was witnessing the slow death of the Republic. Shortly after Windu became Chancellor, Anakin Skywalker waged what was becoming the final campaign of the war. Acting on intelligence from Republic spies, he tracked the last surviving Separatist leaders to Mustafar. Upon arrival, he and the 501st would easily capture these Separatists, ending the war once and for all. And in the following days, Anakin and Padme made their choice to leave the galaxy behind for a bit, after Padme gave birth to twins, Luke and Leia, safely. And as days passed, Jedi Master Plo Koon moved with uncertainty in the temple. He'd voted for the Jedi assumption of power, believing then that no other path would work. But now in the months since, doubt was gnawing at him. He saw the toll it was taking on the Order. Younger Jedi were questioning their purpose. Knights were assigned to judicial duties that they were never trained for. The Force itself was thinner, more strained, and Plo Koon was wondering if they'd already not lost the soul of the Republic, no matter how many laws or systems they preserved. He meditated long hours, seeking clarity, but the currents of the galaxy had become clouded. And always, in the background of this fragile peace, Sly Moore moved her pieces across an invisible board. Senators began receiving anonymous messages about Jedi abuses of power. Mas Amedda's body was discovered, and the rumors spread like a fire that the Jedi killed him, and they will kill anyone who tries to stop their rise to power. People across the galaxy began to ask, why had their Jedi not returned power to the people? Why had the elections been suspended under emergency measures? Why was the Senate becoming a silent chorus for a council that few had chosen? After a few months of Chancellor Windu's leadership, the Republic balanced on a crumbling foundation. What began as an emergency measure was already twisting into something more permanent, and the uneasy alliance between the Jedi Order and the Senate grew with every passing day. Inside the Jedi Temple, new arguments boiled behind closed doors. There were debates about authority and control. Jedi like Plo Koon quietly questioned whether their order had traded survival for corruption. In the Senate, Bail found himself trapped between loyalty to the Jedi and a fear that they were witnessing the birth of a new dictatorship. Rumors bloomed that the Jedi would never relinquish power, despite everything Windu said to the people. Sly Moore spread rumors that the war had been a Jedi coup all along, that democracy had ended the moment the Jedi joined the war. The Grand Army of the Republic, repurposed as a standing security force, patrolled the streets of Coruscant and other core worlds. Kamino's cloning facilities were shut down, but the clones remained as soldiers without a cause, loyal to the Jedi for now. Anakin Skywalker, the people's hero, had vanished after the war's final battle. The surface of galactic politics did remain calm, but thousands of plates were spinning behind the scenes, and no one knew where it would end. With the Jedi in control of the Senate, Sly Moore moved beneath them like a shadow in a room of men, orchestrating a slow, deliberate collapse. She knew the Jedi were arrogant. They thought they've won, that just because Palpatine was dead, so was his vision, and so every action was calculated, every movement insulated by layers of secrecy. She didn't speak to crowds or issue public manifestos. Instead, she weaponized distrust, bleeding it drop by drop into the veins of the Republic. Loyalists to Palpatine were gathered, reshaped, unleashed as whisperers. Judicial officers were hinting at Jedi corruption. Mid-level senators were suggesting that the Jedi Council would never relinquish power, that elections would be delayed for security reasons. The Senate was rotting slowly from within, minor scandals and procedure delays manufactured with precision to erode public confidence. In the streets, protests were growing, not organized revolts, but scattered flashes of anger over food rations, shipping taxes, clone patrols that were seen as oppressive. Always it was the Jedi that were blamed. Always, subtly, the idea was spreading. The Jedi were killing the Republic. But outside of the shadows, in the Chancellor's office, there were moments where Mace Windu could feel the cracks forming under his feet. He could see the Republic stretching endlessly across the stars, each system depending on him to hold the darkness back. And yet somehow, the darkness never felt so close, even without Sidious. Every day, every hour, the galaxy shifted further from certainty. Senators were whispering behind closed doors, civilian protests were getting louder, and even the Jedi Council grew quieter in their meetings. Their eyes were lowered, their trust was eroding constantly. The war had ended, but it had not healed. It had only exposed how deep the fractures ran in this galaxy, in this Republic. Windu still meditated. He still sought the peace of the Force, but increasingly, the stillness was eluding him. Each decision he made as Chancellor pulled him a step further from the Jedi he once was. He told himself it was temporary, that the Order and the Republic would recover, that he could force stability into existence if he simply held firm enough. And yet doubt was constantly gnawing at the edges of his mind. Were the Jedi saving the Republic, or were they only delaying its death, standing atop a corpse too stubborn to fall? Windu hated the thought. He crushed it whenever it surfaced, and still, it returned each night when he tried to sleep. He would see and hear about civilians bombed in the streets, clone troopers discarded after their use expired, idealists like Organa growing delusioned with every decree, and it pained him to see it all, but he didn't know what to do. And he knew that somewhere in the shadows of the galaxy, he could feel it, the subtle pull of an enemy that he couldn't yet see. It moved through the Senate, through the alleys of Coruscant. He defeated Sidious with his lightsaber, but he couldn't just cut down this silent corrosion, working its way through the Republic. Windu clenched his fists behind his back, staring out into the endless city, hoping to soon find clarity. And beneath Coruscant, Sly Moore was finalizing the last pieces of her plan before the takeover could truly begin. Before her knelt a Jedi Temple guard. This guard was recruited by Sidious long ago to help the Empire rise with Inquisitors. But now he would have a new role. He would not strike the temple. Instead, he would shatter its foundations by making the Jedi appear to be exactly what the galaxy feared: executioners without law. The guard would be sent into a meeting of galactic senators to kill them and to blame the Jedi, and above them Bail Organa was moving carefully. Sly Moore's agents had been watching Bail for weeks, trailing him through the hidden corridors of the Senate, tapping encrypted messages sent to sympathetic senators. The meeting was set for tonight, a gathering of voices once loyal to the Jedi, now questioning their role. Moore did smile faintly beneath her pale hood as she dismissed the guard with a flick of her hand, and soon, in a dim conference room deep in the Senate building, Bail stood at the head of a curved table, flanked by Mon Mothma, Garm Bel Iblis, and a handful of other senators whose names carried weight across the galaxy. The lights were low, windows blacked out. No official records marked this gathering. No minutes would be taken, but to the senators' surprise, a Jedi was here. It was Plo Koon, sitting near the edge, his presence a silent warning that the Jedi were not wholly absent from this conversation. Some Jedi still did oppose Windu, not fully, but enough to attend this meeting. Bail had invited him for one reason: to gauge just how deep the unease within the Jedi Order did truly run, and to remind himself that not all Jedi had embraced Windu's grasp on power. At least, that was what he thought. Bail leaned forward, and he spoke of troubling signs of elections that were postponed, clone security forces quietly reinforcing key sectors, dissenting senators pressured into silence. Bel Iblis, never one for subtlety, openly questioned whether the Republic itself could survive another few months under this leadership. And across the table, Plo Koon's fingers tightened against the polished table, betraying a tension he hadn't yet voiced. His loyalty to the Jedi was unshakable, but loyalty was not the same as blindness. He could see the cracks forming. He could feel the currents shifting. Bail pressed on, proposing a declaration, not an open rebellion, but a coordinated demand for new elections immediately, a return to constitutional order, or Windu will have to be removed. Plo Koon stood silent, but Bail still watched him carefully, searching for any sign that the Jedi might choose diplomacy over domination. But then, the door to the chamber slid open with a hiss. No one had called for an adjournment, and inside, a figure entered that was not here for peace. His hands moved to his belt as the figure ignited a red lightsaber. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The senators just stared, frozen between denial and horror, as the mask of a Jedi Temple guard was now bathed in red. One of the senators yelled at Plo that he did this. The Jedi are plotting to kill them all. But Plo Koon's blade erupted to life in a flash of blue, and he told the senators to get behind him. Locking eyes with Bail, he said this was not his or the Council's doing. This man was not working with the Jedi. Hesitantly, the senators would get behind Plo. The Inquisitor snarled at Plo, saying he clings to broken ideals, voice distorted by the mask, as he said the Jedi have become tyrants. The Inquisitor spun his blade, swinging down on Plo, and Plo countered with a tight parry, blade locking the red saber aside for a heartbeat, his voice calm, even amid the fury, saying the Jedi serve the people, and the appearance of this Inquisitor is only proof that the Jedi had no choice but to step in. The Inquisitor only struck harder, driving Plo into a defensive spiral that forced him towards the far wall. Chairs splintered as the red blade cut through them. A console sparked and exploded as a stray swing shattered through its core. But Plo Koon did not falter. He shifted his footing, absorbing the Inquisitor's momentum and turning it, using the assassin's aggression against him. With a fluid sweep, he redirected a wild slash into the floor, then pivoted sharply, bringing his hilt against the Inquisitor's shoulder with a crack of impact that sent the crimson blade tumbling from his grip. The Inquisitor staggered with a pained scream, and Plo told him he was once a guardian, swearing an oath to protect the people, but now he's become a monster. The Inquisitor answered with a shriek of anger, summoning the Force in a violent blast that hurled furniture in a wave of energy. Plo gritted his teeth, standing firm, planting himself against the floor. His robes whipped around him as he advanced step by step, cutting through this storm with sheer will. And with a final surge, Plo leapt forward, saber flashing downward in a clean arc. The Inquisitor tried to raise his hands to defend himself, but it was too late. Plo's blade carved through him, and the Inquisitor crumpled to the floor with a groan. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the scared breathing of the senators. Bail was the first to move, stepping forward cautiously, voice low but urgent, as he said they need to find out who sent him. Plo extinguished his blade with a heavy breath, the blue light fading into darkness, as he said they must inform Windu and the Council of this, and the confrontation in the Jedi Council chambers would be one of pure determination. Plo Koon, Bail Organa, and Mon Mothma stood before Windu, Yoda, and Kenobi. They laid out the attack, and in Windu's face was the cold acceptance that they had all missed something very crucial, that the shadows Sidious had cast had not died with him. And together, the Jedi and the Senators coordinated the search. A specialized clone intelligence unit would retrace the assassin's last movements. Through crumbling access tunnels and abandoned city spires, they followed the trail of uncovered footsteps back to its source. In a rusted sector of the underworld, they would find the lair. Sly Moore was there, and she did not resist. There would be no grand final battle here, or dramatic escape. Her defeat was quiet. The last flicker of the Sith's politics extinguished just like that. In the weeks that followed, the Republic began to heal. Windu would call a special session of the Senate, announcing his resignation as Chancellor. He spoke of his mistakes, that he held on to power too long, and the Republic needs leaders who ruled by the people's will, not the Jedi Council's decree of the Force. The Senate chamber roared with applause when Bail Organa was elected to take his place, and by his side, Padme Amidala would return to the political stage as Vice-Chancellor, with Mon Mothma also working right next to her. Their quiet strength, moral clarity breathing new life into the halls of the Senate, and under their leadership, there would be sweeping reforms passed to ensure that the Jedi and the Senate would remain allies, but very separate, two pillars supporting the Republic, rather than one trying to rule over the other. Anakin Skywalker, having returned from Naboo with Padme and their twins, stood before the council as he was granted the title of Jedi Master, not for his victories in war, but for his commitment to peace. Luke and Leia were quietly accepted into the temple as Jedi younglings, and in the Senate, bills once again passed with debate, not with decree. The clone troopers, no longer needed as soldiers, were offered citizenship, homes, lives among the very people they'd fought to defend. Statues of fallen heroes, Jedi, civilian, were created across the Coruscant plazas, reminders of what had been lost and what had been preserved. The Republic would never be perfect. There were still arguments, moments of doubt, betrayal, treason, corruption, still the slow, grinding work of governance, but there was real hope again, not the brittle, desperate kind that clung to the dying days of the war. Across the stars, the galaxy began to put itself back together, and above it all, the Jedi and the Senate were standing together as guardians of this peace. And folks, that is our story for today. The goal today was to pursue a story where, Palpatine dies, but we really dive into, what could this look like politically if things kind of just really do go wrong. So that was the main goal, a Windu chancellorship where he's trying to maintain this crumbling galaxy and just maintain what is left of the Republic, which really is nothing. And I just wanted to explore the foundations of the Republic falling apart already, and just, get political, I guess. We're in the Andor era, so I wanted to just explore what that could be like with the Jedi in control. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was definitely took me longer than most to write, I think. It was pretty complicated. A lot of moving parts. Bail Organa was fun to mess with and just kind of have his trust with the Jedi be shaken a bit with them grabbing power. So wanted to explore that. Wanted to explore Sly Moore as a villain. I've never done it, so why not? And appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video.